preview our next guest, or one of the next ones coming in anyhow, is going to be Laura Malasani is her name. And I really want to talk about kind of what she does and their organization in relation to what this chapter entails, so that we get some good directed questions. So hopefully the group, whichever group, is it two, I think, is responsible here. You guys are paying attention. Laura is a part owner, I'm sure, of the Gary and Leo's IGA, which has a store here in Havre, and it has, I know at least one other store and maybe a few other stores around the state, I think in some smaller communities. So Havre's kind of the headquarters, and I think some of these smaller ones are maybe Conrad. I don't remember exactly, but we'll find that out when she gets here. And interestingly, the store here in Havre, the employees are represented by a union, and I don't think that's true in the other stores. So we've got a nice comparison, and she works, obviously, if she's part owner. And I say that her dad was Gary, so of Gary and Leo's, and so I know that if she's not part owner, she's involved in the ownership side of things. So that gives us some interesting contrast, and I think, again, a way to get some real directed questions. Her and I talked about it a little bit too. She said she would maybe have to hold back a little bit about some of her opinions, and I said that's fine, but we can still focus some questions, regarding maybe some of that contrast, right? And so we'll talk certainly about some of these basic organizational concepts, and again, maybe applying those to, is it different if you're communicating, say, with the union versus the non-union store? So, right, you got delegation, span of control, specialization, sure, and you could certainly ask that question, is it easier? Are there rules for delegation when you have a union, a collective bargaining agreement, versus a non-union store? Okay, and you'll hear me refer to a collective bargaining unit. That's basically a union, right? Sometimes in a collective bargaining agreement is the agreement that the ownership has with the union. Okay. Yeah, these are some more generic questions that don't really have to do with the union, but do you ever tell yourself it's easier if you do it yourself? Yeah, I think most people in a supervisory capacity have that, and sometimes you have to set that aside and take the time to teach some people. HR, we kind of talked about that, right? We talk about reasons for being in business, and that'd be good, just a good generic question, why do you do this, and do you enjoy it? Gary and Leo's has been in Havre for about 25 years now, and had these other stores, I think, that were added since that time, and good questions to ask. So we could certainly ask about leadership. We could ask if that changes. Again, there's a good spot to address the contrast. Does your leadership style have to change? Based on whether you're dealing with the collective bargaining unit or not, or the union or not. Yeah, an organization in trouble might have too many people and too many meetings. Gosh, can you say? I won't get on my editorial stool there. I'll just kind of say that. Yeah, I have seen organizations that are definitely like that. So. Yeah, there you go. If you asked me, I would say that I am definitely a non-meeting type of person. Not to say that some meetings aren't absolutely necessary, but I think a lot of them are unnecessary. So, yeah, so recipients of delegation. Again, is that different? If you're out asking or showing or directing somebody to do something, if you're an owner, is that response different if you're dealing with the union or a non-union group? By the way, I should add that we still might have another person coming. I've I've reached out to the gal from Hill County Electric and Triangle Telephone, who's their HR person. She was going to come during the HR, but something came up. I've invited her to this because their situation is much the same. They have both union and non-union employees actually kind of under the same roof. So, interesting contrast, I guess. So. Informal organizations, do you have informal organizations? The union itself would be a formal organization, but are there some informal ones within there? And how do you deal with that, right? Organizing activities by groups. I think you might find that this might be more prominent in a union type of an organization where duties are pretty specifically defined and adhered to. I think that's less so when you get into non-union places. But again, some great questions to ask. The social contract for good human relations. Yeah. Again, do you find that having a good relationship is enhanced or impeded maybe by dealing with the union folks versus the non-union folks? The theories of leadership, I don't know that those, if we brought those up, that our guest would maybe have a ton of information about that or a ton of knowledge about those specific traits. Maybe, I think she's a Northern graduate and she probably went over that, but it was probably a few years back. So, okay, communications, right? And, I have never worked at an organization that people didn't complain about the lack of communication, and we just saw that with the successful raid or whatever on the ISIS holdout or, Big Daddy. And, the complaint that Trump didn't inform the Speaker of the House or the Gang of Eight, actually. Those questions those questions about communication or those concerns about communication come up in every organization. And so that's something I don't think is ever going to be perfected, but we need to work towards. And again, here, what's the contrast, right? Is it easier to communicate? In some ways it might be. If you got a union, maybe you just go to the union and say, this is what we want to have done, versus having to tell a whole group of people, maybe. Rules of communication, yeah. Keep it simple, recruit initial users. Sometimes that's you got the flow chart of the organization, and you tell, you're the general, you tell the colonels, they tell the captains, and etc. Hopefully I got that right. Some barriers. There's a lot of barriers to effective communication. Some of it's just a poor effort, but some of it's some of these other things, right? Motivation. Yeah, how do you motivate your employees? There's a good general question, and more specifically, again, what's the difference when you're talking about union versus non-union? What you can do or what you can't do. Why do you motivate them? Okay, you want to attract good employees. Yep, you want to improve them. Obviously, you want to improve the performance of your overall organization. So, performance equals ability times motivation. I always kind of looked at that. I always looked at that in terms of sports figures. And we've seen it. There are some people that just seem to have a real natural ability. And still, to get to those high levels, they still have to have a lot of motivation, right? And on the other hand, we see people that maybe weren't endowed with the natural ability, but they have extreme motivation, and they become successful as well, and their performance shows it. So that's my analogy anyhow. I'm sure there's others. So techniques of motivation. I think we could ask this in a general sense. I don't think that any of these specific ones would be readily apparent to our guests. So we might ask that, do you have methods of, I should go back, or techniques of motivation that you prefer to use? Yeah, performance appraisals. And how that works, I'm going to tell you, I hated performance appraisals. I just hated, I hated receiving them. Not that they were bad, but I also hated giving them, which I had to do a lot of. And my reason was it was a point in time. We were picking a point in time, and at the end of the year, and trying to appraise somebody for their last year's performance, and that just never seemed right to me. And I think one of my favorite authors when it comes to management, I'm pretty sure it was Peter Drucker that said this. Might have been Deming, but and I like them both. But anyhow, they said that performance shouldn't be appraised just once a year. It should be a daily, right? It should be a daily thing that we do, and we just constantly. All day long. It should be when we're working with people or we have people working for us. It should be something that we do constantly. Counseling, we could sure ask if those things are available at this place, right? Do they have any of these? I don't know if that organization is big enough that they would. Sometimes organizations that aren't huge would outsource those things. They might still make it available, but it's going to be outsourced. We could certainly ask those questions. How do you handle complaints? Here's a good question. And again, I would bet that in this case, there's going to be widely different procedures and processes, and that's got to make it difficult for somebody to go from one store, say, to another store, and you've got one that's union and one that's not, and I'll bet you these procedures are quite a bit different. I might be wrong. Maybe they can have similar procedures. Maybe they take the procedures that they have in the union and just organize the other ones to maybe that level, if that makes sense, just because that's where they have to go anyhow. Discipline, again, wow, great questions there. I have a feeling we'll see some contrast there when we talk about those things. So positive discipline, and can you do that? Can you do positive discipline in the different settings, again, union versus non? How to do it legally. Montana's a little bit unique, and I don't know, I'm sure our guest knows the law in Montana, but maybe doesn't know that Montana's law is unique in that, Montana was, at least until recently, and I haven't seen any changes, I think is the only state that defines wrongful discharge. And by that, it has established a set of procedures that businesses or organizations should follow in order to ultimately discharge somebody or fire somebody from that employment. And that's a kind of a unique law, that we have. And I would bet that a lot of the rules and whatnot that people say, and it's not just the discipline or the ultimate firing that's important here. It also outlines how we do discipline some folks and what the steps are that you need to do, and it makes it sound miserable because you talk about firing, but the point of the disciplinary steps is to actually improve that person's performance and make them a valuable employee over time, right? And so we, certainly we can talk about that. We might bring that up, and again, I'm sure that our guests will know the law and be more than willing to talk about some of those things, right? So yeah, encourage self-discipline. You do something wrong, you step up, right? And positive discipline. So here you made a mistake. Let's show you the correct way to do that, so that next time we get it right. Okay. Union membership, is it increasing or decreasing? It's been decreasing since the 50s, okay, and especially in the private sector. Okay, the public sector, I think, has been holding kind of steady and done okay there, although it'd be interesting to see when there was a recent court decision that's coming up. We'll talk about it, that may hurt that area as well, but overall it's been decreasing, and if you look around, it's becoming more difficult for me to find employers, say in the Havre area, outside of the railroad, which is huge, maybe the hospital, that have union workforces. Okay, it's not as common as it once was. So laws and union management, these are good and they're interesting. We talk about those in business law class, I know, at length. I doubt we'll get into those with our guest here. Right to work laws, again, same thing. They're really interesting. We should discuss them. We do in business law. The Janus decision, just briefly, because again, it's not going to apply to our guest, but it was recent. It was a recent decision that was made by the Supreme Court that said non-union workers cannot be forced to pay fees to public sector unions. So you can opt out. Basically for public sector workers, here in the United States, this was a Supreme Court decision. It allowed them to opt out, so you would not have to be a member of a. You don't have to pay dues. Okay, it was an interesting, decision. In the past, the way the law kind of read was that, well, even if you could opt out, you could choose to not belong to the union, but you still had to pay dues. And Janus was the person that actually fought that, and got that all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in, I think it was his favor. And again, that's fairly new ruling. I haven't seen a huge impact. I haven't seen a whole lot of people that have left the union, here on campus, say that would be available to them. Okay. Management prerogatives clause. So there's things that the union can't interfere with. Okay, the employer has to make business decisions. They have to on a regular, daily basis. And there's things that the union just can't. Employment at will was a concept. It sort of doesn't exist anymore, I would kind of say. But it really said that you could fire. Employees can quit without reason, right? They can just come and go as they please. And the old employment at will kind of said, well, then employers have the right to hire and fire people at will as well. And that concept, there's protections built in. And again, Montana's law is kind of unique in this regard. But even in other states that are called employment at will states, there's still legal protection. There's still lawsuits that they go through that, yeah, they can fire. There's no procedure set up in the state law, but, you still probably have to have cause to fire somebody. Otherwise, it'll go to court. Right to work state's kind of interesting. And again, it's interesting, but I don't know that that's something that we'll discuss with our guest. Organizing business, we could ask, about their organizational structure. I don't think that would hurt. That's aside from the union issue, certainly, but we could certainly ask about that. Okay. I think we'd find that, in a grocery, obviously have the departments. You've got the produce department, dairy department, those types of things. And they probably have people in charge of those departments, is my guess. I have had somebody from IGA come in before. I'm pretty sure that that's the answer. So, are there informal organizations within? Good. You could have ad hoc committees, those types of things, problem-solving teams. I don't know that this would have that. If they did, my guess is it would be at the higher levels, that Laura and some of her top people might meet and discuss those types of things. There you go. That's it. So hopefully I didn't take too long. Again, I look forward to this guest. I think it'll be really interesting, and I hope you find it as interesting as I will.